Hello. So welcome to our final part on this series on environment and health. And we're going to talk about detoxification. And when we talk about detoxification, I want to make it what I want to define what that means in my frame of reference. Because often somebody says, oh, detoxification, that means somebody's getting off drugs. That is a form of detox. Typically in drug rehab, detox means the period of going through acute drug withdrawal, okay, which is detoxing the body from that addiction. I'm not talking about that kind of detox. When people you hear about, and I've heard it about for 30 years, so I've been researching and practicing this area for that long, I can detox by taking this herb, or I get colonics and that detoxes my gut. I can do this fasting program, these psyllium husks. I can do all these things and they'll detox me. So first of all, when I'm talking about detox, I'm talking about the chemicals and drugs that we have mentioned and covered for the last 9 or so parts of this series. These are man-made chemical and or drugs that are oil-based to store in the body's fat tissue. And when I talk about detox, I'm talking about how do we get those chemicals that have built up in somebody's system for 5, 10, 15, 20 years of life and is impacting their health and well-being. I'm not talking about gut detox. I'm not talking about fasting detox. Those things, by the way, I'm not denigrating them. I've had many people tell me that they did fasting and it changed their life. One of my sons did an amazing fast. It changed his life and health in terms of nutrition and the performance of his gut and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that. If you're going to do fasting, those kind of detox, I recommend you do it with a physician or nutritionist, somebody who's trained in its advice and counsel, so you know what you're doing. But those things are good for the gut, for the blood system. They're not going to detoxify man-made oil-based chemicals and drugs. They're just not going to do it. Yeah, if they would, I would tell you. There'd be a simple way to get around it. The only form of medical detoxification for chemicals that I know of, up until the one we're going to talk about shortly, was a treatment for heavy metal poisoning. So let's say you were a lead worker or a miner. You soldered lead joints or worked with mercury in factories and manufacturing. Heavy metals like mercury and lead, we've covered them, are neurotoxin. And so a person in an industrial exposure gets a high whiff of this stuff from some kind of exposure, and you go to the emergency room, they could be actually having seizures, intention tremors, all sorts of problems. Much more acute problems than you and I have just from the lead exposure we get in our everyday life. And so what they would do in an emergency room at a hospital, I know they do at UCLA, is they use a chemical called EDTA, and they use a process called chelation. Now let me define chelation. Chelation comes from the Greek root meaning to claw. And so what EDTA is a chelator. What that means is they give you an IV, they drip that EDTA into your system, it goes to the blood, not the fat, not the bone, it goes to the blood and it claws onto those heavy metals and you pee them out. And so an acute heavy metal exposure, EDTA chelation, would be the indicated treatment in most medical practices and hospitals today. And it does have a basic workability. Now, the problem with it is, and anybody who's gone through EDTA chelation will tell you, is that it will take what's in the bloodstream, the water solubles, out through the pee. And then what happens, because the body wants homeostasis, the lead and mercury that's stored in the bone, in the tissue, will then leach out in the blood to create an equilibrium. And so they'll have to do EDTA chelation again, and then again, and then again. And eventually you're bringing the body burdens down of those heavy metals, okay? And that's the only form of medically, scientifically proven, published detoxification for toxic chemicals I know of. Until when I moved to LA from Philadelphia in 1980, a friend of mine came to me and said, "Hey, Michael, have you heard of this Hubbard detoxification program?" And I said, "L. Ron Hubbard?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, well, God, I read Dianetics when I was undergraduate at Villanova, had done Dianetics in Scientology since, but I hadn't heard Hubbard had written a detoxification program, and that was an area of my interest. And so it's covered in a New York Times best-selling book. He wrote a book on it, and it's called Clear Body, Clear Mind, and I read the program. And I went, gosh, this looks interesting. I don't know if it's going to get DDT, pesticides, or mercury, or lead, or asbestos, or any of these chemicals out of the body, but it's something we as scientists could test. And so we decided to do so. And let me describe the program in brief. You should read the book. You can get it on Amazon.com or any of the major book suppliers. Like I said, it was on the New York Times bestseller list just a few years ago. But the program consists of it's a daily program. It lasts 2 to 3 weeks on the average, a few hours every day, and it consists of a medical doctor's exam before you do the program, and then you do a daily regimen of niacin, vitamin B3. Followed by physical therapy exercise. That's not classes, that's designed for the individual basis on knees, back, age, etc. And that the exercise and niacin then followed by low temperature sauna or steam. I say low temperature because like if you and I go in a health club, my health club, the sauna in there is 200 degrees and they don't ventilate them because it costs them money to heat them. They don't want the hot air getting out. And so I go into that health club sauna and I feel like I'm being asphyxiated and overheated because I'm being asphyxiated and overheated. And so the saunas on this program are like a physical therapy unit sauna. If you go to the Lakers training facility in El Segundo, California, I've been there, they have physical therapy saunas. They're 140 degrees, not 200, 150 degrees, and highly cross-ventilated. Expensive to run, but they're highly cross, there's plenty of fresh air. And science has shown that when you sweat at 140, 150 degrees versus 200, your body actually sweats more than it would at a hotter temperature. At too high a temperature, Red Cross handbook will tell you, first sign of overheating at a high temperature like that is your body stops sweating. That's not the point of this program, to stop sweating. So you go into that sauna per the Hubbard program, 10, 15 minutes, come out, cool down, replace water, electrolytes, you're sweating out minerals, salts, and so forth. That's all provided to you as part of the program. Back in, sauna some more, come out. And you do that alternating for the rest of the day. Now, there's a lot more to the Hubbard program. You should read the book. But as you go through the program, over the course of the 2 to 3 weeks, the niacin doses are increased. This is niacin, not niacinamide. This is not time-release niacin. Those have been associated with certain kinds of stresses on the liver. This is just straight niacin. At the doses you do on this program, there's no problem with liver or anything like that. And as you go through the program over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, you're increasing the doses of niacin. So we said, okay, as scientists, no one's looked at the Hubbard program. So what does the science say about its components? So we looked at that. Before we're going to spend valued and hard-earned nonprofit research money that we had to raise to study this thing, we wanted to see, well, what's our prospect of success? So we better look at the science on the components. So we did. We looked at the science of niacin, and that's published in the New York Journal of Medicine, New England Journal of Medicine. Niacin, when you take it, it's a vitamin B3. It mobilizes fat to the blood. Well, that made sense. If we're going to get chemicals and drugs that build up in your fat, we have to mobilize them in the blood. It also made sense why the program would not take 2 days or 3 days. It would take 2 to 3 weeks because you don't want to over-mobilize all the crap that I've stored in my body in one fell swoop. You want to do it gradiently over time. Someone who smoked a lot of drugs, they might be stoned. So you want to do it gradiently so it's doable, and it's done that way. But niacin mobilizes fat to the blood. It's one of the reasons, and you can ask any physician, Google it. One of the first things you recommend to bring cholesterol down is niacin before you go to drugs, because it mobilizes fat, helps burn it. So that we felt comfortable about niacin. Physical therapy exercise, well, we had reams of data and scientific studies that exercise will increase blood flow through the bones, the muscles, the fat, increase cardiovascular capacity, all the information you'd ever want on physical therapy exercise. Then we looked at sweating. And that's where we got sort of really interested and even excited. Because obviously when you're under heat, we all know what we do. We sweat, okay? That's water excretion through our sweat glands, okay? Just be on a nice hot day, you know what sweat is, okay? But every place you have a hair follicle on your body, which is all over your body if you're a mammal, you have an oil gland. That's this stuff. That's not sweat, that's oil, that's fat. The technical name is skin lipid or sebum. And so every place you have a hair follicle in your body, you have a sebaceous gland, which will, with heat, excrete more oil. And we went, oh my goodness. Because the reason these chemicals and drugs don't easily eliminate from the body, these man-made oil-based chemicals and drugs don't easily eliminate from the body, is because the body can't break them down in its normal digestive tract. We haven't evolved quickly enough some magical enzyme in our gut that breaks down the pesticide DDT. So, and that's why they store there. So what comes out through your skin, skin oil, skin sweat, does not have to be metabolized. Could it be that simple? Like Steve Jobs liked to say, the ultimate elegance is simplicity. Could it be that simple? So we said, okay, Mr. Hubbard obviously did his homework. He just didn't willy-nilly throw this together. He obviously did his homework. And so we said, okay, if we're going to do that, let's look for a dirty population to test. And we found that in Michigan. In the late 70s, early 80s, there was a catastrophe in Michigan that happened, and it's been reported in media and so forth. Ron Howard, I think his first directorial movie was on the true story, what happened in Michigan, called Bitter Harvest. And in Michigan, a chemical company, a huge one, made two major products of their plant. They made a magnesium oxide bulking agent that went into cattle, chicken, and pig feed. It wasn't a steroid, it was just a bulking agent, actually a mineral. And they also made at the same plant a flame retardant chemical called polybrominated biphenyl. Man-made, oil-based, toxic as hell, okay? Not unlike, very close in family related to dioxin, the chemical that was in Agent Orange. And this was designed to retard heat. So it was used in firemen's blankets and foam to put out chemical fires as a flame retardant, not something you would eat or anything like that. Well, we don't know for how many months, even to this day, they crossed the two inadvertently. And out into all the chicken, pig, and cattle feed went this really toxic flame retardant chemical. All of a sudden, cows started getting born with their hearts outside of their chest as a mutation. They started dying in the fields by the thousands. Chickens, pigs, same thing. And by the time they figured out what was happening and did an epidemiology survey of Michigan, 97% of Michigan's human population was contaminated in their fat tissue with this flame retardant chemical. And so we said, oh my goodness, that would be the acid test. Because we know, and I've covered it earlier, the Environmental Protection Agency has done a national survey and updates it every 5 years over the entire U.S. population. All of us have approximately 100 known cancer-causing, immune-suppressant, hormone-disrupting, birth defect-causing chemicals stored in our bodies. That's you and me. We know that. There's no political aspect to that. We just know that's the truth. And so this was another chemical that built up in the fat tissue. So these farmers had the farmers who were closest to the eggs, the butter, the milk, the chicken, and so forth, they were the most ill. They had acne, boil-like acne, like bulbs of it on their skin, like an Agent Orange veteran had. From Agent Orange exposure. They had intention tremors. They had all sorts of symptoms, skin rashes and all this. And they had these for years. And Mount Sinai School of Medicine came in and studied these farmers for 10 years. And they would take fat samples of them, analyze the fat tissue for the level of PBB in their fat, and look at their symptoms, and then test them every year or so. And after 10 years, and the chemical contamination had stopped in the environment, they had in their bodies this same amount of chemical that had not gone down by 1%. And they had the same symptoms, health symptoms persisting. So he said, and that was published in the Journal of American Medical Association. He said, well, that's the acid test. So we took those farmers, we brought them to Los Angeles, to our clinics. We took fat biopsies of them before the Hubbard program. We put them through the exact Hubbard program. For them, it averaged 19 days, and we took fat samples of them at the end of the program. We also collected during the sauna, sort of gross, we collected their skin oil and their sweat, and we took all these samples at the end of the program, and we sent them to an outside independent government lab. And so we were hoping as scientists, hey, if we get 2-3% reduction in some of these drugs and chemicals, in 19, 20 days, that's a breakthrough. We might be able to get more funding for more research into this. And when we analyzed them, when the federal lab analyzed them, because they do that on what's called a gas chromatograph mass spec, it's a fancy analysis device. But when they do that test for a chemical, you will see on the spectrometer a lot of the other chemicals that we know are you and me. So we want to know, not just for the farmers, but for you and me, the common person walking around, what's this do? Also, half the farmers, so we added those to the list that they would test for. And half the farmers smoked marijuana once or twice a month, so we added THC to that list. Okay, so when we got the results back from the government lab, we had 60 to 90% reduction of all chemicals, all 30 of the chemicals we tested, 29 of which are in you and me, and THC, okay, within 19 days. And more importantly for them, the farmers were symptom-free for the first time in 10 years. We videoed it, we have clinical documentation of it, no boils, tension tremors gone, liver function normal, immune system functioning right, skin rashes gone. Obviously they were elated. And when we got the results back on the skin oil and the sweat, what was coming out of it? Lead, mercury, DDT, polybrominated biphenyl, THC, we documented the excretion route. So we had a safe program, okay, that effectively reduced something that no other detoxification attempt had been able to do, man-made oil-based chemicals and drugs from the body. We went to the Swedish Royal Academy of Sciences and their environmental peer-reviewed journal called Ambio, and that study was published in Ambio. And since then, we've conducted, colleagues of mine, I think I was co-author on 6 of the studies, 12 peer-reviewed, published major scientific studies on the Hubbard program. I worked with Cesar Chavez for years, so we did studies on farm workers exposed to pesticides. We looked at 28 firemen who went down to chemical fire in Shreveport, Louisiana. We looked at 22 LA cops who went down to chemical fire in northern LA County. Cops are worse than firemen. Firemen go to a chemical fire with all their protective gears on, their respiratory, their independent air systems, their gloves, their boots, and everything else. Cops go with their guns and the direct traffic. And so the cops got much sicker than the firemen. So we had at my clinic at that time in West LA, every afternoon, about 8 or 9 cop cars would pull up, park outside the clinic, and the cops would come in. Those that weren't off, some of them were so sick they weren't even able to work. They would come in, lock up their guns, and we'd go through the Hubbard program. And so it was quite amazing. What was interesting is the city of Los Angeles paid for those cops' treatment at the clinic, and all of them were able to go back to work when they were done. So the city was delighted because the small cost of the program saved them millions of dollars in workman's comp suits, disability, unemployment, all that kind of stuff. So it was a win-win for everybody. Colleagues of mine, when 9/11 happened, think about 9/11, all the chemicals that was in that when those towers came down. I mean, more chemicals you could count in a room. But the first responders who went to that, they weren't thinking about chemicals. They were digging with their hands and their feet and backhoes and shovels to try to save lives. But when it was all over, you had 5,000 first responders who were so sick they couldn't go to work. They were poisoned. So colleagues of mine, Tom Cruise, we really led a lot of this from an environmentalist point of view. Adam Sandler, Paul McCartney, City of New York pitched in, and they put 3 installations, in distance close distance to the site of 9/11. And I think now to date they put almost 2,500 of these first responders through the program safely, and most of them are well and back to work. So what we know about the Hubbard program, it's safe and it's effective for someone who's been chemically exposed. I looked with colleagues of mine. I started 2 nonprofit clinics, physician-run, that delivered the program to people, like chemical exposure cases, but also people who just want to do it for their general health. And so we looked at 2,500 well people like you and I. And what did we find? We found it reduced their fatigue, increased their energy level, it improved their reaction time. We actually measured it on neurometers, it's a device for measuring reaction time, their skin tone, their liver function, their immune function. And so after 2,500 well people like you and I, we published reports, so for a well person, it changes their life. So we found the program highly effective across the boards, and I'm a proponent of it because I think it's a baseline program anybody should do in terms of environmental health to have a solid foundation to start from. So let's refresh ourselves so we understand why detoxification. So let's say I'm a rancher down in Chile. I raise cattle. I buy pesticides from the gringos in the U.S. and I spray them on the grain, so bugs don't eat the grain, and that I feed my cattle. And so I feed them that grain with the pesticide on it. every year as they grow for 5 years. And the cows have a lint trap, and so they can't break down the DDT or whatever pesticide it is, and it goes to their fat tissue. So after 4 years of life, the farmer slaughters a cow, and you and I eat it at Burger King or Wendy's. Okay, that's the problem. We're the end of the food chain, okay? No one normally eats us. And so that's why this becomes a real problem of human health and wellness, and something why I'm so concerned about it. I mentioned this earlier, maybe in the introductory part, but take a look at the study that Johns Hopkins and Mount Sinai have done with women with breast cancer. 50, 75 years ago, one woman in 50 got breast cancer. Today it's 1 in 7. It's its own pandemic today. And they did a study. They took women between the age of 25 and 55. For the purpose of the study, they never had worked in a factory or on a farm, so they had no heavy chemical exposure history known. And they also had to have a breast tumor. And they hadn't had that tumor diagnosed as to whether it was benign or cancerous. And they took those women knowing that you and I and they would have 100 known carcinogenic poisons stored in their fat tissue, and they biopsied their fat and analyzed them for the levels of those 100 chemicals. They then biopsied in the same woman their tumor to see if it was cancerous or benign. Okay, in the women that had breast cancer, they had 65 times the level of those 100 chemicals than the women who were cancer-free. So we have a clear cause-effect, empirical, evidential link. As that internal dose increases, our risk goes up. That's why. Oldest principle of medicine, dose-risk relationship. So all we're trying to do here is reduce your dose. And that's an important thing to do. An old friend of mine, he's passed away now, but he was a Harvard physician and immunologist. And he started a practice 40 years ago because he was convinced as an immunologist that people have allergies to things that we might not have a test for. Okay, so for instance, if you have a pollen allergy or dog dander allergy, they do what's called an IgM-mediated response in your blood, and they can see that you have a pollen or a dander allergy, and then they do whatever they do to treat that. He was convinced that people could be allergic to a lot of other things, and not because they weren't allergic to them, but because we didn't have a test that showed it. So he developed ways of testing people with challenges as to see whether they're allergic. And this is how food allergy was discovered. He was the discoverer of food allergy, and he wrote a book on it. And it's gone to, I think, 7 printings, okay? And that book is called Alternative Approach to Allergies. And in that book, he said, look, if I challenge a person with a very, very small dose of this food and they have reactions, and then I remove that from their diet and the symptoms go away, I empirically, by trial and error, found what foods are allergic to. He developed a whole treatment regimen. Well, how does that relate to detoxification? I got a call in my office in the 1990s, and my secretary said, a Dr. Theron Randolph wants to meet with you. He's coming in from Chicago, which is where his practice was. And I said, okay, put him on my calendar. So right before he got there, the day I said I had him on my calendar, I looked him up. I went, oh my God, this guy at Harvard doc, he's published all these books. He started the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. Oh my God. So he came to me, and so I was sort of in awe. He's like a mentor. And he sits down and he goes, I said, so what can I do for you? Why do you want to see me? He says, I read your scientific studies, and I want to give you my hypothesis. He says, I take patients who have allergic reactions to chemicals in their environment, perfumes, cleaners, foods, etc. I try to isolate what they have a reaction to and remove those things from their environment. Sometimes it's harder than easier, but we do that. And these people have become chemically food sensitized. And I've always known as a research physician that I was only addressing half the problem, because I knew from the science, he'd read all the science that I've covered with you guys for all this time, that many of these chemicals build up inside the body. So even while I've removed these chemicals from their diet, their air, their plants, their foods, their water, and so forth, they still have an internal exposure. So he said, so I'm dealing with the exogenous, external exposures. This Hubbard program would possibly address their endogenous, their internal exposures. So if I really want to get them well, as most as I can, and that was his dedication to life, and he had 40,000 patients, I want them to go through detox. So I said, okay. He said, this is what I propose. I want to send 100 of my worst cases, most chemically food sensitive cases to you, and have your physicians put them through the Hubbard program. And let's take a look before and after tests. So we did. And in the last printing of his book, Alternative Approach to Allergy, he added a section, a whole chapter on detoxification and the Hubbard method and what we found. Because what we found was we proved his hypothesis. These patients got remarkably well, remarkably reduced symptoms, and were able to live much more regular, normal lives. So, a great story, great attestation to the value of the Hubbard program for someone with allergies. And just another reason why I think this is an important issue. Toxins in our environment. We stop the exogenous exposures. We've covered that in many parts on this series. And at some point, we address the endogenous, the internal exposure, by a full detoxification. Well, thank you so much for watching this series. If you want to take a look at the scientific studies that were published by the Hubbard program, you can go to detoxacademy.org and you can download and read all those scientific studies. If you have any questions or follow-ups, you can always email me, and you can email me right through my website, rmichaelwisner.com. So be well, be healthy, and thank you for your time.